Hello, Internet. So nice to see you. Welcome this morning. Well, it could be afternoon or evening where you live to the new Music Theory Talk, this one. And today, as usual, this is Tommaso Zilli, musictheoryforguitar.com. If you are watching us, say hi in the chat or comments and say where you're from. We want to know where are you guys watching us from. Today, I have a special guest. She's been a regular here. She came here many times, and you guys keep asking for her. So you guys keep asking. You send me emails. Say we want to see her again, and so I'm inviting her again. Without further ado, songwriting coach Diana de Cabarrus. Hi, Diana.
Hello. Good to see you. Thank you very much for inviting me back. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you for coming. And today we're going to talk about narrative tension. So, Diana, what is narrative tension?
Well, while I answer that, write in the chat if you have never read a detective novel, seen like a police or a cop show or a medical drama. If you have never watched a detective or medical drama or read post in the chat. So my guess is going to be there's not very many of us. And most of us have watched tons of these shows. And there's something that medical dramas, if you think about ER or all the medical dramas you've ever seen, and police and detective and procedural dramas have in common, it's that there's a problem that's being solved. So what is this person sick with or injured with? How did it happen? Can it be fixed? We get invested in whether they're going to get better and recover or whether they're not going to. And the same with police and detective procedurals. It was the accolade of my life when a friend's father gave me the nickname of Miss Marple. And that's because we want to know what happens next. You know, I consumed Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie's by the bucket load when I was a kid. So that thing of wanting to know what happens and trying to solve a puzzle is incredibly fascinating to us. And so that might not seem like I'm answering Tommaso's question as to what narrative tension is, but quite a lot of our troubles as songwriters kind of boil down to what am I going to say, and then what am I going to say after that? So for the purposes of lyric writing, narrative tension is curiosity. So that feeling of wanting to know what happens, that is tension, that's narrative tension. And that investment we get where we're trying to work it out, or the cliffhangers that soaps end with, all that creation of narrative tension is to keep us invested, and it's the capture of our attention. So for our purposes just now, we're going to define it basically as being curiosity. So when you create any kind of expectation, any kind of curiosity, or any unresolved information gap in your lyrics, something isn't said or isn't made explicit, you're building narrative tension. And so just like building up musical tension can create a sense of drama and expectation, narrative tension basically is going to help us get people's attention and keep it. So describing it specifically as tension rather than just saying, well, it's nice to have kind of curiosity working in your lyrics, gives us a way of making an equivalence between some of the musical elements and some of the narrative and lyrical elements. And that's very helpful too, because that helps us kind of have a picture of everything that's happening in our song. So basically, when we create narrative tension and we play with people's expectations and we create curiosity, the listener is much more likely to pay attention. We will have succeeded in creating a genuine connection with them. So, and the reason this is super interesting is that this isn't even their active conscious choice. So it's not like somebody's coming and they're going to decide to pay attention to what you're doing, and then they're kind of going to switch on the attention, attention mode activated. It just happens anyway. It happens by itself. Curiosity is so powerful that when a series of experiments were run where people had to wait for the answers to some completely meaningless puzzles, they were going to get the answers anyway, or they could pay to get them sooner. A surprising number of people paid to get them sooner because there's the kind of dopamine that's released by the satisfaction of this curiosity is so intense. It's something that happens neurologically and cognitively that we're not consciously aware of. So if you've grown up in a Western music tradition, you will have heard certain types of musical movements and patterns that now exist within you as expectations. And when those expectations are sort of triggered by something that you hear, it creates an experience that you're not in charge of. So I can't listen to a really tense chord progression and experience it as relaxed, because there's too much programming in there. So I don't know if Tommaso is willing to play for us a little chord progression that perhaps has some musical tension in it. You
Absolutely.
experience this for yourself, that you're not deciding how to interpret this. It's creating a reaction sort of in terms of your experience of what he's going to do that is below the level of conscious.
Absolutely. So you can have something like that. So, and like you say, it's not a choice. These and these don't sound particularly tense. These want something. This is tense. That relaxes it. This put more tension in it. I can also do that, by the way. Make it even more tense, and then it relaxes it again. Once you start you have to identify, because many people who don't listen to much music or are beginners feel the tension, but they cannot label it properly. But once you start recognizing what we mean with tension, you know this is tense, or you know that this is tense, and this is more relaxed, and this is tense, and this is relaxed again. So, but yeah, it's not a choice.
So yeah, there are things that you can do with curiosity that are also not really a choice. So that doesn't mean that we're manipulating people, or that it's a formula, or that it's dishonest, or that it's kind of creatively vacant or anything like this. It just means that when you understand it, you have got another way of communicating. And whilst many of us...
Sorry. All of these, in a sense, it's a formula, but who cares? I mean, it's...
Well, yeah, we could get very distracted.
The formula for... There is a formula for tension in music, okay, which is essentially when you hit stuff out of the tonic chord in the key. But that doesn't mean that the formula gives you one solution. You have lots of possibilities, just a description. If you swing right, it's this thing. If you swing left, it's the other thing. But it gives you a lot of freedom. But that's not a problem if it's a formula or it's not. Or at least that's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly you might generate certain effects in a reasonably consistent way. Like if I order a vanilla ice cream, I know what it's going to taste like in advance. That's why I ordered that one and not the chocolate and chili.
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly.
So exactly. I don't think that I think it's more recipe than formula.
And let's call it this way. Yes, let's call it this way. Yeah, I agree. It's more recipe than formula.
So hopefully all you guys could hear that, and maybe there's some people that experience that that kind of more tense chord progression as relaxing, but most of us are going to have a hard time truly perceiving that diminished chord as something we could listen to for sort of 10 minutes while we're doing yoga. So there's an extent to which this narrative tension is something that we can engineer as part of our music to help people connect with it and to get them interested in what's going to happen next, to make it memorable, and that this will work at a level that's really not sort of consciously chosen. It's just using the cognitive architecture that we have, that that are kind of how our brains work, in such a way that increases the chance of your work connecting with people. So that's really what narrative tension is: curiosity for our purposes. And the reason that it's interesting for us to be able to, if you think about, we might take it for granted that we want to get people to pay attention to what we're doing. But the reason for that is that when you've got the listener's attention, you can create a bigger experience for them. So if somebody's really paying all their attention to what you're doing, or you're a film and you're completely engrossed in what's happening, you're immersed in it, you're going to have a bigger experience. If you're performing live, you've just hugely increased the possibility that that kind of connected, shared experience can happen. And if you think about your favorite gigs that you've attended as a member of the audience, or perhaps that you've played if you're a performer, that there is a sort of magical aspect to to that feeling that everyone is in the same moment. So you can achieve that much more powerfully if you use all of the means possible to get people's attention into what you're doing. And it makes the experience more satisfying for the listener. So you're more likely to create a wonderful experience for the listener if you use this idea of narrative tension as one of your tools to get people to commit their full attention to what you're doing. And so if you review a lyric draft through the lens of tension and curiosity, it can also help you know why some sections might feel a bit flat, or why you wanted to communicate something a certain way, but right now it's not really working. If you put somebody in a brain scanner, whole regions of their brain light up when curiosity is awoken. So this fact of it not being a conscious act of paying attention, but an entraining or an engaging of someone's machinery is for me very, very fascinating. So, human systems of perception are designed to pick up change, and really all stories and all music boils down to something changed. So if you just heard one chord for 10 minutes, you would become bored and switch off. If you just had one note for 10 minutes, you'd get bored and switched off. If you heard one rhythm for 10 minutes, you might enter a deep trance. But for most things, if they stay the same all the time, we're going to get bored. And that might seem like a really obvious observation, but I think it's worth making it really explicit, because that helps us contextualize what we're trying to do musically and lyrically. So if you keep your narrative, this idea of narrative tension in mind, you can order your ideas, you can put them in a sequence as in such a way as to make it easier for the listener to make use of, to create this bigger experience for them. And if you take care in assembling things that way and connecting the ideas that you want to share, you are going to have a more profound experience with the work that you create for people to listen to. So if you think of a comedian, most comedians and comics, they start out and they have their little 5-minute or their 10-minute bit, and they take a long time honing it and working out exactly how they're going to tell the story, so the way it's told gets the biggest laugh. And the kind of tension that's in comedy, it's we like, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then the laugh usually comes because something unexpected happens or something a bit exaggerated happens. But there's still sort of narrative tension in that as well. It's just used in a specific way. So keeping this concept of narrative tension in mind can also help us make decisions about the best way to sequence the elements in our lyric and decide what we're going to order it so we can get the biggest effect and make the biggest impact. And it can also help us classify different kinds of meaning. So if a given line is intended to sort of set the scene and paint a picture, you might have a lot of descriptive words, or there might be stuff about the environment. There might be things that give people the opportunity to picture something. So we might have details about objects or colors or sounds, and that can be really great. If there's any Lord of the Rings fan here, Tolkien had like enormous passages, so he slightly divides his readership, because there are enormous passages in most of his books where he's just describing the Shire, and it's like, and the oak tree had 50,000 green leaves, and there was dark green and pale green, and some people really love that, and some people skip ahead to the battles. I think maybe I skipped ahead to the battles a bit, but that you can see that he's dividing that information into sort of scene setting descriptive content, which is really important and necessary for people to feel like what you're saying is realistic. And then there's plot information, where somebody says something or does something, the action changes, the meaning changes. So if you think about your material that you've got, perhaps you've got some ideas or some brainstorming, thinking about it through the lens of narrative tension can help you decide how Tolkien to go. And so whether you have 2 lines of description or 8 lines of description, when it's got a little bit too much, when you need to kind of keep the tension high by having some more sort of plot points or emotion points in there. So it can help us make the best decisions about the way to order the elements in our lyrics. A huge part of the listener's enjoyment in detective stories and whodunits is in their own work that they're doing. So as soon as you start watching something, if you're the sort of person that drives their partner mad because like, oh, I reckon it was that woman by the vegetable store because she gave the detective a funny look, and they wouldn't have cut to her if they didn't mean us to. If you're the sort of person who does that, you're a prime example of the fact that we get a lot of satisfaction out of trying to work it out. So something becomes more meaningful to the audience when they have a stake in it, when they've started wondering what's happened or what's going to happen. And if you can evoke that for them and make that connection so that they start investing in that way, you're communicating with your audience much more directly, and that is just wildly a great outcome for what you're doing as an artist.
Yes, all of that. And I like the idea of balancing description and plot, and balancing tension and release, and all of that. Before we go ahead, one note for the audience. Audience, everybody listening, you guys can ask questions in the comments or the chat. We are going to take them up maybe later. But I know you guys have questions. In fact, we already have a question. And it's like, actually, that's not a question, because there is not a question mark. Okay. So are you saying serenading a metalhead is different from a pop head? And I'm thinking, I'm going to fill this one, Diana, for you. Like, duh. Did you need the expertise of a famous songwriting coach and a music theorist to realize that if you want to serenade a metalhead and a pop head, you have to play different songs? Come on, guys. Give me better questions. I know you guys have better questions than this. That's not a bad question, but the answer is yes. Okay. So,
well, I might add to that. You might make different choices musically if you're
Mhm.
serenading a metalhead from a pop head. And the pop song, just to like really default to cliche, might be about a breakup, and the song to the metalhead might be about an epic quest. But in both instances, if we're going to get from like the beginning of the song to the end, we are going to want to know, why does the quest matter? Who is making the quest? What are they trying to get? What are the forces ranged against them? In the pop song, we might want to know, who is the person singing, the person who's left, or the person who's leaving, or the person who's thinking about leaving? Why are they having these thoughts? What is the situation with the other person who's the antagonist? What's going to happen? Are they going to stay separated? Are they going to get back together? Is one of them going to come to a sticky end because they behaved badly? So in both cases, we are going to want to make use of narrative tension for the metalhead or the pop head to pay attention right to the end of the song. A great example from pop point of view, Sabrina Carpenter's song Please 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 starts with the idea of, she's basically, I've done my makeup all night, nice, please don't embarrass me by being really awful to me in front of other people. So she's in this kind of, obviously this difficult sort of dynamic with some who she can't pull herself out of, or the singer rather. So there's the protagonist, there's the antagonist, there's the question of what's going to happen. Are they going to be able to get through this evening tonight? Is she going to kind of, and she's not even asking to be treated well because that's the right thing to do. It's like, just don't mess up my makeup. Like, I'm not even going to ask you to be a decent human being, but just try and all of that is kind of suggests a field of context within that which that happens that's really interesting and provokes a whole lot of curiosity. So, I would listen to the end of that song. Tommaso, maybe you've got a metal example.
Honestly, not on the top of my mind, but you are perfectly right. I mean, while the implementation, the sounds, the style is different, the structure is the same. There must be a why. Why it's important. There must be some curiosity. What's going to happen? Absolutely right. So maybe serenading a metalhead is not that different than serenading a pop head. Okay, we still have to catch their attention, and we still have to give them a reason to listen to us. Good. See, great teachers can do a lot with with any question. So, guys, ask more questions. You have the occasion of asking Diana a question. Take it. Take it. Diana, so, well, how? What are some simple ways? Because we've seen why we need narrative tension. But now the tension for me is, okay, so how do we create it? Okay, what do we do in practice? If I'm a songwriter, a composer, all our audience, many of them are songwriters. What do we do in practice to create narrative tension in a song?
Well, the good news is some of you probably do this anyway, because the patterns of narrative structure are so like the patterns of musical structure that from all the music that we've listened to. So before I really kind of understood much about theory, I still would write chord progressions that I now that felt good to me, and I now understand that's because they satisfied certain expectations that I had. So one way of creating curiosity is to have a question or a puzzle. So if we have something like "Smells Like Teen Spirit," that's a bit of a puzzle. What does that mean? What smells like teen spirit? What is teen spirit? Is it rebellion? What does it smell like? The Man Who Sold the World. That's quite a. How can you sell the world? It's immediately evokes curiosity. What's the frequency, Kenneth? Are we human? Are we dancer? So I've used song titles here because you can see that those song titles are immediately more memorable than "I'm Missing You." Now, I'm not saying that we should always have all our songs should have questions as titles, but you can immediately pinpoint how the puzzle created in one line gives us something to focus our attention on and is somewhat more memorable than a more generic song title. So that's one way we can have a question or a puzzle, and that would be the kind of detective story as well. Another way would be to not meet expectations, to violate expectations. So there are lots of things that we've already kind of, you probably got favorite songs, or you can think of songs where there's suddenly a chord or something happens that's not expected. In Bohemian Rhapsody, if someone heard that song for the first time, there's loads of unexpected things that are happening. Now, they're not unexpected to us once we know the song, but that's a good example of lots of musical things that are unexpected. In titles, if you think of the Johnny Cash song, A Boy Named Sue, we don't expect boys to be called Sue. So we've immediately had our expectations violated and we were immediately curious. In the Smiths song, The Queen is Dead, you're not supposed to talk about the Queen that way, especially not in England in the 80s. That's like, whoa, so that's a violation of expectations. Expectations can, of course, be violated within the song lyrics as well, but just as a kind of quick microcosm of how that can work. We can also have a sequence of events with an anticipated but unknown outcome. So something like this would be a race, a battle, a confrontation. It could be something like the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. We know the ship's going down, but we don't know how bad it's going to be. What's that one called by, having a senior moment about the band name. It's about it's okay, it'll come back to me in a minute. So any songs like that where and those are the more obvious examples, but there can be other sequences of events which have an anticipated outcome that's unknown. So that's another way that we want to know what's going to happen. What's the result going to be? Is this person going to win the match? Is the other team going to win the match? I mean, that curiosity drives billions of pounds in sports ticket sales every year all over the world. And then the fourth way we can drive curiosity is when we have an information gap. So something just isn't clarified. And a good example of that in a song is Ode to Billie Joe, sorry. So we never find out what was thrown off the bridge, and we never find out exactly what happened or why. We have these little bits of story are imparted in this very kind of mundane farmhouse setting, and we never find out what the answer was. So that's a good example of an information gap and how that can drive curiosity. So there's also, here's an example. I'm just going to show you this slide. Some of you may have seen this before. The world's shortest story. Now, are you seeing that? There you go. So what that says, for sale, baby shoes never worn. Ernest Hemingway. So there's a whole lot of information. There's no question mark. It's not a question. It's not a sequence of events, but it gives us a little bit of information and then all these gaps. And then the way our minds work, we are immediately seeking to create some sort of relationship of meaning between those things. We're humans are huge innate creators of meaning. So why were the baby shoes never worn? Did the baby die? It's immediately kind of a bit chilling. Mm-hmm. So that's a perfect, if slightly sinister, although fictional, example of information gaps. Now, how do I get rid of it? There. So that's four ways that you can create curiosity. You can have question or puzzle. You can have violation of expectations. You can have a sequence of events with an anticipated but as yet unknown outcome, and you can have information gaps. So between those, there's quite a few possibilities, and most of those translate to music. So with music, we can have our expectations of what's going to happen violated. We can have a chord progression that sets up an expectation that we're going to hear the same thing, and then we can hear something different. We can have a rhythm that's setting up an expectation that can suddenly change. There can be like we can be building to a big texture and a high dynamic, then we can have a sudden stop. That's a very, very, very common use of the violation of expectations to get people paying attention to the song again. So even if the lyrics are complete trash, using all these techniques to drive sort of like musical curiosity can keep people listening to the song. However, when you got music and words, there's no need for the lyrics to be trash. They can be good, and then your song is going to be amazing. So that's 4 pretty helpful ways to think about creating some narrative tension in your lyrics. When you're brainstorming an idea, you could always have 4 little headings and sort of think about how that idea might relate to those, what it would look like in each of those, under each of those headings, or what the potential is for tension in those categories when you're writing it.
Mm-hmm. We have a few questions coming, and I think it's a good moment to address a few of them. So, regardless of music genre, is there a typical structure to writing lyrics to then align with our chosen chord and the consonants and dissonance associated with each?
I would say that we would naturally tend instinctively towards the most sort of like tense or intense bit of our lyric, like the place we want to like get the listener to feel the most emotional impact, is typically aligned with the musical elements where there's most tension. You don't have to do it this way. You can also do the opposite. There's a guy called Malcolm Middleton, and he has these really bouncy sort of melodic guitar parts, and he's singing these really sort of sad lyrics over the top. Sometimes that kind of disagreement between the mood of the music and the mood of the lyrics can work really well. But certainly, I think you'll naturally find yourself drawing on the tense musical aspects when you want an intense lyrical section. If that wasn't the answer, if by typical structure, if you meant, is there a sort of typical order or sequence where in the song where different types of things are going to be, different types of material is going to be shared, there are lots of sort of possibilities there. But ultimately, you can do exactly what you want. And if that's not helpful, you can, I think, a very sort of simple rule of thumb that works quite well is to make sure you've got somebody's attention before you expect them to care about the emotional content. So if we would have, like, if you would line up the most dramatic and tense musical elements where you wanted people to feel the most intensely, that might also be the point where we're communicating the most intense aspect of the emotion. But you wouldn't put that first, because A, you've had no time to set up any musical expectations from where to create the drama, and so it's just going to sound like odd. And B, we've had no time for the listener to get invested in what's happening. So if we draw them in, and we're on the quest, we've encountered all these, the ship sprung a leak, and now we're going to have to just we've got a limited amount of drinking water left, and somebody's sick. Should we toss him overboard, give him some extra water, eat him? And then there's a storm, and then there's pirates. By the time you then see land, you're so relieved. And we can believe that relief, or we can believe in the kind of triumph, or we can believe in the dread that hasn't happened, because we've kind of raised the tension every single time. So it was like a little bit exaggerated and florid. You're probably not going to have like 8 stanzas of more and more bad things happening to the people in the song until you get there. But that is how most films work. The tension is increased, the pressure on the character is increased until they really have to find out what they're made of. So songs are not necessarily the exact same, but you can take a lot of liberties structurally if that basic idea of the flow of attention is working. And feel free to ask a clarifying question if none of that was what you meant.
And I think the take-home point here is this: is that you can match the tension of the lyrics to the tension of the chords. You can also mismatch them, and it's a choice. It's a musical choice you make. So if you do it randomly, if you don't even realize it may not sound good because it's not intentional, but you can do one thing and you can do the other thing.
So I think typically when, let's say, you're rehearsing in the garage, you're probably going to agree with the other people in your band that hitting everything harder and faster and like make it sound more kind of dissonant works for the bit of the song where you're like, ah. So up to a point, you're going to instinctively do that. But you could do it more effectively when you take a view deliberately on how much you want to do that, exactly where you want to do that, because you might want to leave something in the tank for a bit later in the song, or whether you want to do the opposite. That's what I'd say about that.
Yes, and since we were talking about comedy before, we have this interesting thing here. Now that's a surprisingly hard question to answer. I mean, because we can give examples. We can give. I mean. Okay, so you can give examples on something that will sound funny or comedic, etc. And if you watch a movie, especially a comedy, there's plenty of music that gives that feeling. The hard thing here is to pinpoint exactly what makes the music comedic. And that's something that music theorists have been fighting for at least 150 years at this point. There are articles and articles written on what exactly can make music comedic and funny and not. But for you, Diana, I'm interested in the lyrics. How will you make funny lyrics?
I think it's a question of what the stakes are. So if the stakes are, and if I had a copy of Aristotle's Ars Poetica, could probably give a slightly more scholarly response. But when the stakes are sort of tragic, I don't know, if you turn on the news and there's like awful stories every day about children being blown up and hospitals being bombed, that's awful. That can't be funny. The stakes are absolutely tragic. But if the stakes are not tragic, it's much easier to make comedy out of it. So if I am, going to the shops the day after Christmas in my tracksuit, and then I see somebody I want to impress, it's kind of funny. That's ripe for comedic because the stakes are lower. They're not tragic. It's not a life or death, or it's only existential in the smaller sense of self-image, social and cultural image, not in the whole biological "I'm going to die" way. So the main difference, if you wanted to write a comedy song, then you can use tension, but in terms of the stakes and what the whole question of what people are waiting to find out, or what the puzzle is, that question or that stake has to be something that's not life or death. Enough that we care about it and it's relatable, but not something that's going to be traumatic to everyone.
I like that. It's perfect. It's perfect. I didn't even think of that. It's great. It makes total sense. And lots of comedy is making a big fuss about something that is not important.
Not important, but relatable.
Yes. Yes.
So we have to kind of like care enough. If we don't care at all, we don't recognize it at all, we're indifferent. Now we're not paying attention. So there has to be some stakes, but they have to be not tragic or not so kind of big in nature that we have to care too much, because it's not funny if
Nice.
Billy Joe drops a baby off the Tallahassee Bridge.
Now I want to go on with what you have to say, and then we're gonna fill a few more questions. But right now, I wanna know. Okay, so let's say you have an idea for a song. Okay, how do we think about that so that I can write lyrics that have this narrative tension? What question should I ask myself? How do I proceed from the idea to a narrative?
Okay, so this is the whole deal, isn't it? So most people who are interested in songwriting have probably at some point sat down and got a pen out and tried to like write the first line of their song, and then have tried to write the second line of their song. That's certainly how I started out many years and years ago. And then from there, we established that that approach has certain limitations, and perhaps we move on to something where we're writing more material and we're extracting from that material to write our lyrics. And so you might call that brainstorming or splurging or unpacking, but you're going to have your idea, and then you're expanding upon that idea as an intermediary stage before selecting specific lines and specific events to put in your lyric. So that's thing number one, that we're not starting with like, here's my pencil, going to write the first line of verse one. We've got this kind of brainstorming stage first. So then what am I going to do? You can just have your topic in mind and write anything that comes into your head, but it can be helpful to actually use questions to guide you. So there's two kind of categories of question that are quite useful. So one is open questions, and that's there's sky's no limits on this idea. It can be anything. And so a classic open question is, what if? So let's imagine so for example, the Beach Boys song, Wouldn't It Be Nice? That is a what if song. Who's saying, what if we could do whatever we wanted, and we were kind of grown-ups, and we could live together and we could be together, and we didn't have to follow the rules that we currently have to observe. So that's like a what if song. And you can take any idea and look at that idea through the question of what if. So if we took this idea of a breakup, it'd be, what if I'd never met you? What if you hadn't met the person you moved on with? What if we didn't have such rigid expectations of one another? What if we were on a desert island? Or what if we were in space together? Or you can look at that topic from the lens of what if and get lots and lots of different possibilities of how that could be treated or where that's come up. So that's one open question that's quite helpful. And another open question is why. So when you put these types of questions to yourself, you will write different material than if you just sit down and write everything you can think of. Writing instinctively and just writing anything can also be a very helpful step. I'm perfectly happy if I do a whole page of A4 scribble and I get one line. Like if it's a right line, I'm perfectly happy with that as a ratio of kind of effort to result. So you could just write freestyle, but these questions give you something a little bit different. They pull things out of you in a slightly different way. They give you a means of responding that you might not otherwise have. So what if and why are two good ways of starting to expand upon your topic. And the why question is going to obviously tend you towards more meaning or emotional content. Why did we grow apart? Or why did I take that job? Or why did you cheat? Or why did I pick someone who is inevitably going to behave in that way? Or why do I accept such things? Or so the what if will give you perhaps more circumstantial, situational material, might be more scene setting, and the why will give you more emotional and meaning content. And you sort of want both of those categories if you need both of those types of material. So those are two open questions. And you can also then have...
If I may interject for a moment, I like how all those questions you mentioned are good for writing songs, and they're also great conversation starters. It's the same thing, one way or another.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of obsessed with there's a book on questions called A More Beautiful Question by someone called Warren Berger. And he sort of considers a question to be a precision tool, a kind of an art form in itself, that when you have a well-designed question can get to answers and insights that nothing else can. And so I think it's once you've got a topic, the more questions you can think of to interrogate it, the more you're going to pull out of that topic. So that's stage one. And then stage two would be deciding how you're going to order the information. So once you've kind of freestyled and got all this stuff, and maybe you've thought of 3 different iterations of this song that aren't compatible. That doesn't matter. You can just kind of experiment with one avenue and then experiment with another avenue and see which you like the best. So then when it comes to deciding how you're going to order that, I would recommend not worrying about rhymes. I would recommend, once you've got all your kind of freestyle stuff that you've done and you've asked the questions and you've unpacked loads of possibilities, you're then going to read through underlying things that seem more interesting to you than the other things. So in a way, all of this is you responding. When you ask a question of a topic, you're responding to that question. When you've filled a page or 2 pages or whatever it is with ideas and you read them back, you're then responding to what you've written. And so each level of response gives you, you're kind of being truer to your own compass, because you're giving yourself more detailed opportunities. It's a bit like kind of warmer, colder. So that's how I would approach that. And sometimes you might come up with a topic and you don't squeeze that much out of it, and you've got to start again with another topic. That's fine too. All good practice. So what you can also do once you've got all this stuff is that you can use time and space as one ordering principle. So time, you don't have to be chronological, but you can just use it to decide when the listener is going to know different things. So again, Ode to Billie Joe is interesting because she sort of starts late in time, and she starts with the outcome and gradually fills in some of the other things that we heard. So as a song goes through, I think it happens quite early on. That it's like they hear Billie Joe's was found, off the Tallahassee Bridge, and then you only hear afterwards. You kind of it's a bit like Twin Peaks. The beginning of Twin Peaks. Find Laura Palmer, and I'm just going to take this moment to acknowledge the greatness of David Lynch, and he is transcended back to the realm that he was communicating with his whole life. And so, yes, an appreciation for him. But that's Laura Palmer dies in the beginning. We find out why and who as the series goes, as we get through the series. In fact, we don't find out for ages. So when you start with something and work back, that's one way of using time. So you don't necessarily just have to go forward. You can, but it is a useful ordering principle. It's like, what order do you want people to know things in? And then here's another interesting thing. So I'm just going to share another image. Right. This was a very famous ad campaign. And what you're seeing is a Volkswagen car and the word lemon with a sort of very pointed full stop. And when you see those 2 things, one next to the other in space, your brain is immediately both making a connection between 2 adjacent things and then having a puzzle. It's like, this is a car ad. I'm putting this car next to the word lemon, which, when it's used in terms of machinery, means like a dud. Why is Volkswagen telling me that their car is a dud? And so then you're going to read the advert because you're really curious and now you want to know what's going on. So when you put one thing in space next to another thing, you entrain people's desire to create a meaning and an explanation out of that. So in fact, what happens in the text of that advert is Volkswagen explains why you're not going to get a lemon, because they've got this very rigorous testing process, and anything remotely lemony gets like hoiked off the production line before it gets anywhere near a customer. But that's a very good example both of the violation of our expectations and of how we make connection of 2 things that are next to each other. So you can say she turned her head away and tapped her foot. We're going to connect those things and deduce that she might be angry. Whereas saying, well, she was angry, it's a lot less interesting for our listener, because we've and that's you probably heard that good lyrics tend to show, not tell. That's why, because we're not we're not making any of the meaning ourselves when we're told, and so our investment immediately goes down. We're immediately less invested. So something else that we can, this is a famous thing in film, and I couldn't play the clip here. It's called the Kuleshov effect. So this again exploits how we make meaning. Is it going to display? Yeah, it is. So each of those images, Kuleshov was this early director. Each of these images, you can see that the man's face is exactly the same. But the first time he showed it, he showed these sequentially. So we had this first frame for a few seconds, then we had the plate of food. Then we had the second frame for a few seconds, and there was actually a picture of a child in a casket. Then there was a third frame for a few seconds, and there was this woman. And viewers praised the actor's versatility in conveying wordlessly their intense hunger, then their grief, then their longing, because the viewer had created that meaning from the sequence of images. So although this is obviously an example for film, we can still take advantage of that effect in our lyrics, because we can create a little word picture, and then we can create another one, and people are going to start sort of creating a narrative that connects those things. So sometimes when you don't want to be too obvious, but you want to create a suggestion, deciding how you're going to order things in space can be a very good way of building up a certain amount of narrative tension without being too like this happened, then that happened.
I just want to say, you guys should take notes at this point. Okay? Because what Diana just shared you, it's one of the secrets of songwriting, or making art in general, actually. So that make the same thing have different meaning by changing the context or the moment in which you put it in, or other things around it. It's key. It's so important. And she made a great example from film, and she's explaining it for lyrics. This is the most important moment of this video. Okay? Take notes. Go on.
Well, actually, musically, there's lots of great examples of that as well. If you play one note, but you've got a different chord underneath, our experience of that note's completely different. Hang on. Every time you hear the same note, the relationship's changed, the way we experience it changed. So most of these ideas have musical applications as well. And I think once you start having concepts that you can explore with your ideas and with your musical elements, you are able to render things at a much greater level of detail. So that's why I think it's really helpful having these types of ideas to use as organizing principles. Sorry, my video's gone a little, sometimes it has to do that. There we go. As organizing principles to make decisions. Because if you don't have if you've got no way well, let me wind back. If your way of making the creative decisions about what happens when in the lyrics and the music is essentially how it feels to you at the time, that is fine, and it should feel that it fits to you. But that's that can be a very imprecise way of doing it. Sometimes you can just not know how it feels. Like, I don't know, it seems okay, but I don't know if there's something better. So having ways of sort of reviewing what you've done and be like, does this have the tension musically and lyrically that I want at this point? Or is it a bit flat? Or have I got bored? If I've got bored, why is that? So sometimes if something feels a bit flat, but we don't know what to do about it, we just put that thing away and feel like bad because we tried to do something we don't like what happened. But now if you've got a way of analyzing how it could be improved through a lens of tension and attention and curiosity, you're much more empowered to express things in a way that is more faithful to your original creative impulse. So last thought on how we can drive curiosity and tension in the lyric is to think about the forces that are in opposition. And this is another idea that works very well musically. So think about the protagonist and antagonist. So we mentioned that earlier, but there's no end of ways that can be expressed. So there's inherently tension and balance and equilibrium and disequilibrium in that relationship. So Take Me to Church, who's here? The protagonist, the singer. The forces of antagonism don't need to be a person. They can be the repressive social or cultural beliefs that are sort of ranged up against a person. In Mr. Brightside, the singer's the protagonist. The kind of guy that his girl has gone off with, that's making him jealous, is the antagonist. And if you read that lyric, you'll see how he kind of piles the pressure on. We could express that song in one line. Guy is jealous of other guy stealing his girlfriend. But that doesn't make a very good song. The way he's built the tension on that, so that when we get to the chorus and he's like, jealousy, we're all like, yeah, we're all feeling it. So also it has a nice riff. But so yes, that antagonism protagonism axis is another one that you can use to structure the content that you've generated at an earlier stage. And then a very simple idea that I sometimes use is the idea of a seesaw. So you're on a fulcrum, you're going through the song, musically, lyrically, and in terms of the plot, what's happening? Have we just landed on one side and we're staying there? Are we talking about the same thing? Is the same thing happening musically? Or have we got some momentum because we added this information in this line, that information on that line, and that's kind of driving the song forward? So there are a few ideas on how you can explore musical and narrative tension. Tommaso, I don't know if you have any thoughts about musical analogues that I haven't already mentioned.
Not right now, but I was just reading the lyrics to Mr. Brightside since we were mentioning them. So, I think everything you say is great. Actually, I wanted to say another thing right now, and you guys know that Diana has an entire course on lyric writing. I'm just saying, okay, if you guys are liking what she's saying, if you guys are taking notes, if you guys are finding these useful, you know that you can have these and way more in concentrated format because she has a course on lyric writing, songwritinglessonsonline.com. Okay, go there, check out the Legend Lyrics course, right? Legend Lyrics, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Just check it out. Just mentioning it here, not even putting the, just go check it out. It's just these stuff only concentrated and lots more of it, plus exercises. So think about it. Anyway, wanted to answer a question here. I wanted you to answer a question, which is this: what do all great songs avoid or not do lyrically? What are the major mistakes that we want to avoid when creating tension in a story? Now, I know that there are thousands of possible mistakes, but can you mention one?
Well, I've got one caveat, which is that we can actually have horrible lyrics that do everything wrong, but the music has been precision engineered to keep our attention, and so the fact that the lyrics are really bad doesn't hurt the song. So you could still have a song you really enjoyed listening to, especially sort of pop or dance music or music that's very electronic, where if we looked at the lyrics, I mean, for example, I got a feeling that tonight's going to be a good night, tonight's going to be a great night. I'm not saying that's a terrible song, but I guess you could say there's some tension of expectation. Are we going to have a good time tonight? It's sort of that falls into the category of songs about having a good time, and that's a big category of very successful songs. So I think it's hard to be really categorical. But if I was like wanting to audit my own material and I really wanted to avoid the most commonest pitfalls, would be that I'm talking about the emotion right at the beginning of the song before anyone cares. So I'm starting the song and I'm like, I'm very sad today because I have seen a grey sky outside. There's like nothing happening. Nobody cares. But maybe if you set the scene so that that update, maybe we're at a birthday party and you just won the Nobel Prize for songwriting, but you're still very sad. Now that's kind of surprising and interesting. But if we just open with that, it's kind of boring and self-indulgent. So the other thing is that if you lead with emotion content, it kind of slides off our brain a little bit. It's much easier for us to process information to do with description, external. If I tell you not to think about a pink elephant, you're already thinking about one. Your kind of brain's like this model making machine, unless you have aphasia, and it's already kind of doing that. So you generally want to do a bit of world building before you expect people to care about the emotional content. But the opposite is also true. If you just do lots and lots of description and you're Tolkien and we have 3 minutes about how the sidewalks are shiny with rain and the forks of the leaves, that, you know, if there's lots and lots of world building and lots of description, but we got no investment in, like, there's no plot, nothing's happening, we don't care about the characters, that's also going to make people get bored. So are those great? Fair point. Are those great songs? Well, we'd probably need a much longer amount of time than we have to decide whether we could agree on what made a great song. But
Yeah.
you're right. Like, you know, typically they're not, those types of more lightweight material, not necessarily seen as great songs.
We could make another live stream in future on what are great songs.
Oh yeah, we can all. That's going to be a lot of. There's plenty of antagonism, protagonism potential in that topic.
Yep, definitely. Okay. Yeah, idea for the future. Thank you, Toffer. It's a good idea for another few hours of live stream just to agree on that.
So yeah, summary, Toffer, is to think about how much content material you've got in the category of description versus meaning emotion, and make sure you build to the emotion rather than coming straight in with it and expecting people to care. It's a cold world out there.
Yeah. Okay, Diana. I know you have something, after all this, I know you have something for our watchers, for our audience. So I'm going to put it up on here and you can talk about that.
Yeah, so this is everything I wished before I wrote my first 3 albums. It's a guide on an ebook on how to develop your lyric writing practice. So it's got a bunch of suggestions to how you really think of lyric writing. What do we mean lyric writing? How do I practice lyric writing? Again, I definitely started out under the impression that songwriting means getting out your pen and writing line 1 of verse 1 and then continuing till you finish the song. And that's not how I think about it now. And I don't think any of us are going to get to our... Very occasionally we might write a song that way that's great and we leave it. But typically it's not going to give us longevity or our best material. So this ebook gives you a context with which to think about your lyric writing, gives you a bunch of activities you can do to have a lyric writing practice, to know how to practice lyric writing, and it gives you some guidelines. So what I just spoke about with Toffer, and I said not to come in with the emotional content too early. There's a section in this ebook called Categories of Language that helps you distinguish more precisely what type of material you're working with at each point. Like, what is emotion-based content? What is description-based content? So there's a section about that. And that might sound really abstract the way that I've described it, but it's very clear and specific when you see it in the ebook. So it's just got things that would have made a really big difference. Like that alone would have made a huge difference to how I approached lyric writing when I started out. If I'd understood that language simply works upon us in specific ways, like chord progressions do. So the way that Tommaso played a tense chord progression, and certainly, you know, I wouldn't have had a choice to perceive it differently. There's language structures and the way that we receive them that we don't necessarily choose how we're going to process or receive that. And if you as a writer understand that, you have got the opportunity to connect in a much more direct way and create a much more impactful experience for your listener. So that's some of the stuff that's in the ebook.
Very good. Very good. Get the ebook, guys. It's free and the link is in the description. One thing I have for you too, it's, wait, this is it. Okay. I have a free book for you too, guys. Some of you already have it already. It's about playing guitar, of course, and it gives you the code behind all the classic guitar solos. Yes, they use the pentatonic scale, and if you don't know what the pentatonic scale, the book explains it, but it uses all those classic guitar solos use pentatonic scales in a very specific way. And this is not a book of lick. This is a book on how to build those licks. So you go, you learn a few of those tips, you apply them in your guitar playing, and you can have an inexhaustible source of musical ideas that you can use to sound good on guitar. And they're all super simple. I'm promoting this because on every video I have to promote something. Otherwise, I'm not a card-carrying online music teacher. I mean, that's what we do. But I'm also telling you guys, if you have to pick one thing to take today, get Diana's ebook. It's fantastic. And also check out her course because it's amazing. I'm just saying this. And you guys do whatever you want. Diana, thank you for coming today. As usual, super
Thank you
interesting.
very much for having me. Always a treat.
And as usual,
Thank you
super
guys
interesting.
watching for your questions. That was it's always good to hear what you're up to and what your thinking is.
Yeah, it's always interesting talking with you. You have ideas I would never think about, and then we get on, we bounce stuff off each other, and then it's nice. So fantastic. Hope to have you again in future.
I would love to come back anytime.
And everybody, all the audience, thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys for being here and listening to us. And until next time, enjoy.